Prison time for a top Syrian dissident, and he's not the only one. Why does Damascus think Michel Kilo and his colleagues are so dangerous? This is Inside Story. Hello, I'm Darren Jordan. Well, a Syrian court sentenced 4 pro-democracy campaigners to jail sentences on Sunday. 2 were sentenced in absentia to 10 years, and both are in hiding. The other 2 were handed 3-year prison terms. One of those is writer Michel Kilo, one of Syria's best-known activists. He was charged with inciting civil rebellion and attacking the dignity of the state. Kilo was arrested a year ago after he and some 300 other intellectuals in both Syria and Lebanon signed an open petition calling for better relations between the 2 countries. He made waves from behind bars last month when he and fellow jailed dissidents criticized the Syrian government in a letter to a Lebanese newspaper. Well, earlier we spoke to Mohanad al-Hassani, Michel Kilo's lawyer in Damascus. He told us the 3-year jail sentence might be considered lenient, but that he and the rest of Kilo's legal team believe all charges should have been dropped.
Now the judgment has been passed on these prisoners of conscience, Anwar al-Bunni, Kamal al-Labwani and Michel Kilo. We are demanding a comprehensive process of reform, and we believe that it has to begin with a complete overhaul of the judicial procedure.
Well, Sunday's sentences are among several high-profile cases over the last few weeks in Syria. Arrested alongside Kilo last year was the human rights lawyer Anwar al-Bunni. Bunni is now serving a 5-year sentence on charges of spreading hostile information and joining an illegal political group. He told the court he was proud of what he was doing and that he didn't commit any crime. And just last week, prominent dissident Kamal Labwani was sentenced to 12 years in jail for undermining national security after visiting the United States. Labwani was accused of encouraging an attack against Syria. He was arrested in 2005 as he arrived in Damascus after a visit to the US. His sentence is the harshest against a political dissident since Bashar al-Assad took over from his father 7 years ago. Well, Inside Story made repeated requests to the Syrian government for their comments, but they declined to provide a spokesperson. So, joining us from Beirut is Nadim Houri. He's a specialist on Syria and Lebanon for Human Rights Watch. Nadim Houri, thank you very much indeed for joining us. How concerned are you by the sentence against Michel Kilo, and what sort of message do you think the Syrian government's trying to send out?
Well, we're extremely concerned not only by the sentence against Michel Kilo, but also by the crackdown in the last 3 weeks and the very serious sentences against all the activists that you mentioned, Anwar al-Bunni, Kamal Labwani, and the sentences today. And I think there are really 3 clear messages that the Syrian authorities are trying to send, and this is part of our bigger fear. The first one is towards the inside opposition, basically saying that no dissent will be tolerated. Because really, why be so scared, why be so afraid of peaceful activists such as Kilo and the others? I think the second message is towards the Syrian opposition outside of Syria. And I think this is an effort by the Syrian authorities to highlight the fact that they have the situation, quote unquote, under control inside. And I think the third message is really to the international community saying, you know, we're in charge here and we're not, you know, to make any sort of compromises from us, the price will be high. And we're extremely concerned because what we see in the last, actually I would say over the last year, is a crackdown similar to what happened in 2001 when the Syrian authorities cracked down on what was called the Damascus Spring, and they had arrested a number of the most prominent activists then.
Do you think these trials have been conducted fairly? And I mean, have these men been allowed to defend themselves at all?
No, I mean, I think these trials were not fair, despite the effort by the Syrian authorities to kind of give them this cosmetic feel that they were more fair than what used to happen in the past. It is true that they were tried before the Damascus criminal courts as opposed to the state security courts. On the other hand, political interference started from the onset. I mean, if we just take the example of Dr. Labwani's case, the charge for which he was actually sentenced to 12 years was communicating with a foreign country, you know, with the intent of inciting it to commit aggression. Well, that charge was actually not initially brought by the prosecutor. It was only brought in after the head of national security sent a letter to the general prosecutor in Syria saying, you should add this charge. And you know, what's interesting is the defense raised that point in court before the judge, and the court did not actually respond to it. So these were not fair trials. I would actually say that the outcome was predetermined, and all activists got the sentence, the maximum sentence for their crimes.
And what are you and Human Rights Watch doing about these trials? I mean, how do you monitor them and make them public, for example?
I mean, what we try to do at this stage is really to gather all the information, to spread the information, and to try to lobby, first with the Syrian government, but we have not been successful as they have not been willing to engage with us, but also with other governments that have an interest in promoting human rights inside Syria. Now, it has been hard for us to gather the information firsthand, as last time we were in Syria, we were monitored very closely. So we have established, we're in constant contact with other activists and lawyers inside Syria, and we try to have a two-way exchange of information with them.
It seems that Michel Kilo was arrested because he and others call for steps to improve Syrian-Lebanese relations. How sensitive a topic is this for the Syrian government?
I mean, if we go back to the Beirut-Damascus Declaration, which was the background under which they were arrested, and if you actually read it quite closely, there is nothing dangerous to the Syrian authorities in it. The four main points of the Beirut-Damascus Declaration were improved relations between Lebanon and Syria on a new basis, improved economic ties in a transparent way, actually increased protection for Syrian workers inside Lebanon, and fourthly, just in a way to improve the errors of the past. None of these are revolutionary, and if anything, they should be the steps for any future relationship between Syria and Lebanon. And yet, the fact that the Syrian authorities did not accept this just shows how rigid they are in their position, not only vis-à-vis Lebanon, but also vis-à-vis internal dissent inside Syria.
We know that the Syrian government doesn't officially comment on trials related to national security. So how difficult has it been dealing with the Syrian officials?
I mean, to be honest, we've had very minimal contact. And I think partly, as you've probably experienced on this show, it's very hard to get Syrian officials to comment on these issues. What has been reported in the press, and not directly to us, is that Syrian authorities always say, we will not intervene in the judiciary, and this is for the judiciary to decide alone. Well, actually, what the facts show on the ground is that the authorities, specifically the security agencies, are intervening in these trials, and it's only cosmetic, the claim that the authorities do not want to intervene in the proceedings of the trials.
I want to just ask you what sort of help you're getting, Nadim Huri, from the international community, organizations like the EU and even, say, the US. I mean, how are you coordinating your efforts with them and kind of spreading the message abroad outside of Syria?
Well, there has actually been quite a bit of interest on this issue. So in a way, in terms of spreading information, we have found that the EU, the US, and in general, international media is interested in the fate of these activists. What we believe has been the main shortcoming is that statements issued by the EU or the US are not sufficient. And we have actually been critical of visits by Solana or by Nancy Pelosi, the US speaker, to Syria, not because we are against engagement, but what we're trying to emphasize is engagement with Syria has to be preconditioned on Syria improving the working conditions and the field of activity for activists inside Syria. And what we have found is that most of these foreign dignitaries and foreign officials, when they actually go to Syria, they tend to focus on Syrian relations with Lebanon. They tend to focus on Syrian relations with Iraq and Syria's role in any sort of future peace negotiations in the region. And very few of them really emphasize the point that Syria has to take serious steps to improve the situation inside. Specifically, I think the EU has an important role to play because they are ongoing talks about reactivating or actually finalizing the EU-Syria Association Agreement, which has been initialed in the past but never came into effect. So it's important for the EU to really step up to the plate. Okay,
Nadim Huri, we have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Well, time for a short break now, but when we come back, we'll be talking to members of Syria's exiled opposition. What do they make of this crackdown? Stay with us.